Welcome to the Shevchenko Scientific Society. Today, Dr. Serhii Tereshchenko will give a lecture on the work of Yevhen Malaniuk, who is one of the most significant poets of the 20th century in Ukrainian literature. The event will be moderated by Dr. Tetiana Zyadevich. Serhii Tereshchenko is a visiting assistant professor at the University at Albany, State University of New York. He teaches literature and film from Ukraine, Central Europe, and Central Asia. Serhii defended his dissertation at Columbia University. He presented his research at the Center for Science Fiction Studies at the University of Kansas and the Science Fiction Consortium at the University of South Africa. Dr. Serhii Tereshchenko is now developing the book Lyrical Games, Gender and Nation in Polish Hip Hop, and translating from Ukrainian an edition of text titled Cultural Paratroopers, Ukrainian Literary Organization in the 1840s, 1990s. Please welcome.
Good evening. Thank you so much for finding time on such a rainy day to come here and listen to the talk. This is the talk about cultural theory and the nature of power in Yevhen Malaniuk. And I specifically focused on something that has been already discussed, but not in such depth as today, the non-fiction that he wrote, where he explained how he sees the transformation of Ukraine under occupation into a sovereign state. So I wanted to thank, first of all, for the sponsor of my research, Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies at University of Alberta, and the organizer, Shevchenko Scientific Society, for having us here. Thank you. So I will begin with one of the main questions that we are going to tackle today, the emancipatory impulse in European humanistic culture, the idea that there shall be no masters and no slaves. As Kundera wrote in his famous book, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, 1984, since the days of the French Revolution, one half of Europe has been referred to as the left, the other half as much right. Yet to define one or the other by the means of the theoretical principles it professes are all but impossible. And no wonder. Political movements rest not. And in this book, in this passage, Kundera argues that the main change and after this French Revolution is either you support emancipation of slaves or you embrace that as a part of economic system. I wanted also to point that Ukrainian culture from early on, and especially in the 19th century, in the mid-19th century, already embraced this emancipatory call against slavery. One of the most important books in our culture is Taras Shevchenko, Three Summers. I wanted to point to a few items already here that will impact our reading of Malaniuk today. For instance, position number 4 in this collection, to Gogol, right? And Gogol already is delimited as a foreigner in Ukrainian culture. The entire collection is dedicated to encountering the spirit of the Cossack time in today's 19th century, 50 years after the Cossack siege was eliminated by the Russian Empire, Catherine II. That's why the tone and the names of a lot of these poems are about death. For instance, position number 5, a grave has been dug. Or when I die, bury me, famous position number 2, right? But also, there are a lot of calls for emancipation, specifically in position number 15, a famous poem called The Caucasus, where Taras Shevchenko already points to the war that Russia starts in the Caucasus, trying to take over the region. So once again, Taras Shevchenko becomes the foundation for European culture in Ukrainian culture. And I consider Yevhen Malaniuk in the context of theories of liberation from slavery in the 20th century. For instance, Czesław Miłosz, Václav Havel, Kundera, and he is sensing this through the spirit of Shevchenko that he felt in 1917, 1921 in Kiev. He offers his vision of what Foucault and Deleuze formulated as the power of intellectuals. And when they say power, they don't mean teaching or entertaining. They really mean direct management. So Malaniuk also wants to know how to directly manage as an intellectual. And that's why he wrote all of these works from different periods. As you see, the first period is 1920s, 1930s. He works on the theories of arts. He's highly impacted by surrealism and structuralism. That's the moment when he formulates all of his theories already in the 20s. That's the moment when he realizes that to be an intellectual, you have to have a pen in one hand and a sword in another hand. That's one of his first. That's the first collection. It's called Stiletto and Stylus, a dagger and a pen. But also he thinks about already Ukraine as a spiritual, metaphysical object, and that's where he discovers that he has to connect it to the Hellenic culture, Ellada. And after he has to emigrate from Ukraine and then from Prague and then from Germany because of the events of First World War and Second World War, he still continues to develop the same ideas. I haven't seen such a consistent writer ever. If you read his writings from the 20s to the 60s, these are the same ideas that he tries to develop. It's kind of even, we would say, unnatural for a writer. It's his project to be consistent. And probably that's what makes him a modernist. So later on in the 40s, in 1941, he starts his period of interest with history rather than just art. And he writes Kruty, The Real Face of Russia, or Bolshevism, and also Small Russianness. In the 60s, and in the 50s and the 60s, he turns back to the integrated theory of culture in history. So this is his discourse in quotation marks. He says that enslaved souls can be liberated through militarized aristocracy and the school as much as they can be enslaved. So the methods of enslavement and liberation is the same, but it cannot be forced. That's the main difference. And I'll explain you how it actually functions in the theory of culture. So first, the biography. You see here the picture with Vasil Barka, Ula Samchuk, Igor Kostetsky, and Yuri Shevelyov, really famous people in New York, right? 1947. So he already belonged to this intellectual circle, although he did not participate in American academia per se. So let me just give you a brief overview of his biography. He was born in 1897 in Kherson Governorate. He completed his studies in Elisevegrad. Then he moved to St. Petersburg, but his studies were interrupted by World War I, and he returns to Kiev, where he joins Kiev Military School and becomes lieutenant, and he joins the fight for Ukrainian National Republic. And after the defeat of Ukrainian National Republic, in which he participated as an active fighter, he was interned in a Polish camp in Kalisz, and I've been to that city. It's a city visually split between the Russian Empire that governed it and the previous empires that owned it. It's basically half Western, half Russian city. So that's where he started his literary activities. He founded a publishing house and started writing. So he co-founded and edited the literary journal Veselka, in which he self-published. Then he moved to Czechoslovakia, where he met linguists from the Czech linguistic circle. He published his first poetry, as I said, Stiletto and Stylus, the Stiletto and the Stylus, which means the dagger and the pen. He returned to Poland, settled in Warsaw, met Dmytro Dontsov, and worked with him together. In 1930s, he married a Czech national, and in 1930, 1939, that was the most productive period for him, right before the Second World War. He was displaced again during the Second World War and fled to Prague, escaped West Germany and immigrated to New York in 1948. Okay. Um, of course, some of the dates may be inaccurate due to different sources. So then, 1949, he was elected honorary chairman of a Ukrainian institution, Slovo, in the US, and again, he started writing his nonfiction. So for the 40s, the 30s, 40s were fiction, then nonfiction. But overall, we would say that he is a writer who does poetry and nonfiction at the same time. That's like a modus operandi of his writing. So the final years, he released his memoir book. Then he briefly reunited with his wife and his son after a 17-year break. And soon after that, he passed away on February the 16th in New York City. And he's buried in Southbrook, New Jersey. And just recently we visited his grave, and there's the Jesus Christ crown on the grave, right? Because he's our Ukrainian Messiah. So you also can watch a documentary film by Suspilne about Yevhen Malaniuk. It kind of features all periods of his life in a biographical, biographical movie. So a few contexts that I want you to remember once we delve into the questions of emancipation and enslavement. Geographical context, of course, it's important that Yevhen Malaniuk was able to escape all of these dangers and not stay, not being colonized, right? But there's something that Serhii Parajanyan said that if you're colonized, you never return home. And this is something we can say applies to Malaniuk as well. He was never able to return. So something that he looked in the language as the home being return, right? Heidegger's idea were never actual for him. The historical context, I wanted to show you how ambitious the Ukrainian National Republic was, because it includes not only the territories of today's Ukraine, including Crimea, but also Ukrainian ethnic lands, the Don region, right, and Kuban. Yeah. And we know that these territories were declared by 3 decrees of the government, and these decrees differed in how much sovereignty they asked for. So only the 3rd decree of the government was to declare that this is an independent state in 1919. I wanted to show you a few more. The picture in the middle, right, is Molotov-Ribbentrop's pact, and here's Stalin, right, smiling. That's something that, of course, affected directly Yevhen Malaniuk being in Poland and being, being in the country split by the Nazis and the Soviets. Then you see a poster from 1920s, a very important reminder for us that there are different types of nationalistic aesthetics. For instance, this one is a Soviet nationalistic aesthetic, because the Soviet Union tried to appropriate Ukrainian symbolism to promote its own agenda, right? Then a few more things to consider that Malaniuk spent a lot of time with people who directly engaged with Edmund Husserl with phenomenology, the idea that, let's say, the spirit that a human has or a nation has, they are unique, they cannot be compared. And the last thing is that in 1941, when the war on the territories of Ukraine break out, he writes on Kruty, the birth of Ukrainian legend, and he uses it to promote Andriy Melnik instead of Stepan Bandera, because he stands with the idea that internal diversification is inevitable within any society, while Bandera, and I follow here Shkandri's analysis, Bandera was blamed for initiating internal executions of Ukrainian nationalists. So this is where we stand in his historical context. Of course, we could bring up the New York poetic group that differed with him in their view of the social nature of art. But still, Malaniuk was impactful for them because his theory is not purely like weaponization of art, but it includes the idea that art is a pure spiritual experience that has no real narrative. So Genealogy of Malaniuk's ideas, they start in Hellenic humanism that got really popular in Ukraine at the beginning of the 20th century with neoclassicism. Then he speaks of the criticism that church works for the state in Moscow. He also speaks of historical events when Mazeppa and Peter I clashed, and Peter won, and he appropriated the name of Kiev Rus, and since then Moscow's Tsardom started being called um, Russia, right? So for him, this is another important moment of history to see how culture can manipulate history. Then one of the important impacts is the Cyril-Methodian Brotherhood. We'll talk about that, Kostomarov and Shevchenko, and of course Prague linguistic circle, the structuralism that existed there, and the idea that there are two cultures, the binary that exists in humanity, and that you cannot avoid binary in reality. So now we'll see how these ideas were implemented. So it's really important to say that Malaniuk himself defines his theory of power as romantic. He says that during Romantic period, the 19th century, the spring of nations, Ukraine was defeated, but not on the military field, but by a betrayal of the aristocracy. And because of this betrayal, the only thing that remained was culture. And this culture was really sad in songs. And this aristocracy could not produce anything else because it lives through a trauma of betrayal. So he argues that Ukraine needs a new romantic culture. We need to return to Shevchenko, the spirit of Shevchenko, and just start overlooking all this sentimental, sad voice in Ukrainian culture. Being a Ukrainian for him, or any other nationality, is the result of experiencing organic culture inside oneself. That's why it's romantic. It's not the objective reality, as some people wanted to argue for Malaniuk, but something that you feel inside. And it's opposite to the state machine that can only copy other people's culture, but is good at controlling infrastructure. So now let's see how this romantic idea develops. Two cultures, he says. Distinction between these cultures is that one is organic, and the organic culture comes from geography and local history, right? These are ferments that exist in place and create a person without their much consciousness, while there is also the Apollonian side of culture, the army and the elites. And intellectuals are somewhere in between the elites and local history because they have to speak in the language of millions. And this is a very important statement from Malaniuk, that he, as an intellectual, has to translate the ideas from the others in the language of millions, meaning that he's not a producer, but a reproducer. And this puts him on the same side with other scientists of the 20th century in the class studies like Bourdieu and so forth, right? So there is something objective in how he judges about society. So organic culture, the idea of organic culture, although it is romantic, it's conversable with the 20th century science as an objective method. And here I cite my colleague, Olesya Milchuk, who wrote in 2002 a dissertation in English about Malaniuk. And she says that the concept of geoculture, as he introduces it, is defined as a factor in the determination of national psyche, which carried fundamentally new views compared to the positivist ones, for which geography and nature acted as objective ethno-forming factors. I would take actually ethno out because he doesn't use ethno ever. He says nation, right? A nation for him means the state. The similarity of the earth and the human body, the basis of archaic mythologies, determines that the image of the country, in particular its mental characteristics, is transmitted by somatic symbolism. Okay, so there is a little bit of this metaphysics in his theory, but it's already approached as metaphysics in arts. And he says that we just need to create proper metaphysics for Ukrainian culture. That's it. But it's going to be metaphysics. It's not going to be objective reality. So once again, there are two powers: an organic culture is something that diversifies even the same society. So with time, Malaniuk says, every society will be different inside itself, and only a repressive society can hold onto an objective sort of model or universal human. So there are two powers: organic, being different, changing, and the other power is militarization. So nature of power, as he describes, follows Hegelian view, and I should remind you that Hegel also lived through the French Revolution, and he was one of a few philosophers who supported the French Revolution, saying that when there is master-slave dialectics, master is never free from the slave, because the slave produces the reality for the master. Right? These are the ideas that Malaniuk as well reproduces, because he likes dialectics, that there are two things that fight with each other and they produce reality. So that's what his theory is about, and Hegel belongs to Romantic Enlightenment as well, because he believes in national spirit, something that exists outside of human bodies, but they get this contagious feeling in themselves, so they can feel it and carry it, right? So for Malaniuk, culture precedes politics, but culture is also the opposite to politics, because culture is powerless. It's a paradox, right? That culture has to be in place so you can have power, but as itself, if you produce culture without politics, it's not going to impact society. And once again, power is direct ability to manage people, not just to teach them, but to organize them. And so here he comes with a few examples from history, like Cossackism as Cossacization, right? So the people that suddenly feel the spirit of emancipation, and that is Cossackism, something that appears prior to the Enlightenment in the 15th century as a response to enslavement. I'll, of course, have to skip the citations, but those who watch online probably may at some point just zoom in and read them closely. But I want to point here that his idea of culture is that there is always the elite for culture. Either the elite that is foreign or a local elite. And he says that Cossacization is the creation of the national elite. That's what it is. And colonization is the destruction of this infrastructure, of killing the elites, right? So that's the process. You want a state, you need the elites from the local circle. If you want occupation, you just destroy this elite and you control them from abroad. So I wanted to make it clear that Malaniuk uses Russia as an example in so many instances because Ukraine was under occupation. He sporadically mentions Poland as something that changed throughout time towards Western democracy. But if you look under the microscope, you see that his view on reality almost issues completely the present time, except for the present time of Russia. So everything else is in the past. It just kind of is the part of the theory of the historical narrative, but all the countries do not exist for him politically yet. Yet, we still need to say that Malaniuk is opportunistic. He says, you know, if you look into Ukrainian politics, we always experience Turkophilia, Polonophilia, Russophilia, whatever. If it was good for our state, we should do that. If it's detrimental, if it develops inferiority complex, we should skip it, right? So there is nothing stable in this reality. It's contextual. So I wanted to point to a few more things that Kostomarov already pointed into Russian nations, and Malaniuk even uses the same discourse of two nations. And I wanted to point that Kostomarov is an objective scholar. He says that the reasons why Ukrainians and Russians are different is that because they are citizens of different state systems. They were different subjects. In this sense, Kostomarov probably is a way ahead of his time, and this idea would fit 20th century as well. So what is so important for Malaniuk is the Germans and the German philosophy, the spirit in Hegel, as I said, but also the idea that Ukraine has a special place in German spiritual search for nationhood in the, you see, early 19th century, right? It's Herder who says, Ukraine will one day become a new Ellada, new Greece. The beautiful slumber of this country, the peaceful disposition of the people, its musical talent, the fertile land, will one day awaken. From small tribes, as one were the Greeks, a great cultural nation will arise. Its borders will stretch to the Black Sea, and from there into the wild world. And Herder was a teacher for Maximovich, also a friend of Goethe, so an important figure. And he said these words in 1979, after a few years after Zaporizhzhia Sich, the Ukrainian independent state with the Cossacks as the leading power, was destroyed by the Russian state. So power for Malaniuk is a spiritual experience. The way you experience power that is projected from the state onto you is going to create a certain individuality, right? So statehood defines how choices are made, since history is the story we tell when decide on new acts. Absence of state means no power and no sovereignty. However, it's not a permanent state for any nation, but a condition that is constantly challenged by uprising, decolonization, and further occupation. Okay? I wanted to point to one fact that for Malaniuk, although he lived through the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, it's not even existing in discourse. He doesn't talk about the Ottoman Empire. He talks about Mongols and Tatars because he follows Kostomarov, because he follows the historiography that is already 60-year-old, right? And it's quite Eurocentric. So Malaniuk embraces a mainstream political discourse of the time that people acquire national identity during Romanticism. So it's not nothing biological, but it's just a spiritual journey that creators invent somewhere at the beginning of the 19th century. But Kozakism and Kozakization are the parallel concepts to what we see in the 20th century, right? These are the ideas that reappear, like Marxism, right? Or collectivization, whatever. These are the processes that reappear in the same land, continuing despite not having continuity in politics because of the geography and history. I also wanted to point out how he redid the historiography of Ukrainian culture. It's no longer centered in Shevchenko, but it goes to Skovoroda, the philosopher Skovoroda, and once again underlines that Skovoroda is a romantic enlightener, a master of emancipation, and he points that that's the difference between philosophers like Skovoroda and Shevchenko and the elites of the siege that betrayed Ukraine and declared political capitulation, as you see, he says in his essays, page 32. So just to remind you, he says that we should get over negative psychological tonality of historical memory. We should see Kruty, the events in Kruty where young people decided to defend Ukraine, not to become part of Russia, and they died because they were not ready to fight for that. He says in 1941, look, they fought at least for a cause. Now you're fighting for a foreign state. So it's actually, that's the start of Ukrainian mythology that we need to reconsider, that the fight is imminent and we just need to embrace it. Otherwise, we'll just fool ourselves. And what he says is that once Ukrainians are governed by foreign elites, they will exploit the population. And he sees an overlook in Panteleimon Kulish, who was not as radical as Kostomarov and Shevchenko. Okay, so there is already diversification, even in the circle of the people he considers to be an impact, and he uses some kind of diminutive names for Panteleimon Kulish. Okay, as not as brave as Shevchenko and Kostomarov. So power and intellectuals, as we said, right? The power. How do intellectuals take power in their hands? Malaniuk early on in 1926 says that culture is a ritual that creators perform to organize peoples or nations through artistic language. It's a ritual. The religious feeling is a proper human instinct that the Soviet government tried to eliminate. But we need to feel this instinct. We need to feel the spiritual connection to something that does not exist in reality, the thing in Hegel. Art form does not substitute religion, but it's rather a form of religion in which some people believe and others don't. So he already sees that there's going to be a difference in class and consumption, right? So that he works on the elitist art. And it's important for him to be religious and spiritual to be human. Yet, art is not only to give catharsis or certain emotional fulfillment, but also to teach knowledge that is essential for one's aware living. That's why art cannot be completely elitist. And that's why it has to be populist and very simple in the language. So once again, it's a ritual, but really with really simple language. As a contrast, he shows different types of intellectuals who do not possess any power to organize people around them. For instance, Russian intelligentsia, he says it serves a Moscow state and pseudo-European St. Petersburg, but Russian intelligentsia is by definition a-national. So it doesn't matter where these people come from. The only association they may have is with the Russian state, not with the people they govern. And also there is another concept, Maloros, and he says that Maloros is not a Ukrainian who likes Russia, but actually any subject of the Russian state outside of Russia. Someone who likes Russia being subjugated by Russia, like Stockholm syndrome. Yeah. So Maloros is not only a Ukrainian. And these types of people, like Russian a-nationalist, a-nation intelligentsia and Maloros, they cannot convert people into what they really need, right? So they cannot be organic intellectuals. Okay. So he also says that there is no religion in Russian state. He points out to organic movements on the territory of Moscow. He says about the uprisings, Rasputin, and so forth. He says that yes, of course, there is organic culture in Russia, but the state is so powerful that it cannot overthrow it. For him, Soviet Russian and Moscow are total equivalents. He relies on the research of centers of powers. So the exact place where political decisions are made is the most important category of analysis. These places are more important than human. They define certain rules of play between humans. Okay, so either history or geography will predefine how we play between each other, how we exchange. And those who were not able to see this similarity, but they started looking for difference between Soviet and Russian, right? They developed the collaboration trauma that Malaniuk calls the Gogol complex and the renegade handicapness. So once betraying your own spiritual call, you are no longer able to be intact with your society. That's what he writes in Bolshevism 1954. But still, right, it's not about saying that Russian statehood, powerful bureaucracy, is to be eliminated and so organic Ukrainian culture can exist. No. He thinks as a Hegelian, as a dialectician. He says that actually any culture should be dualistic. The organic culture is constantly confronting dogma and the state that reinforces this dogma. Thus, the conflict of two cultures, two spiritual types of the state is ongoing, and we could say an existential necessity. So diversification and militarization, being different, but also being able to defend this diversity. That's what he comes up with. Right? We need to embrace it. That's why he supports Andriy Melnik, for instance. So that's why he wants to see Ukrainian democracy rooted in the Hellenic type of democracy, where everyone is equal. So Russian Tsardom, on the opposite, is of Roman descent. The state, as he says, is a rapist and a violator of the soul. And he follows Kostomarov here. Also, I wanted to point to Serhii Witte, a person of mixed marriage, a German and a Russian one, who was, as you see, the prime minister of the Russian Empire, and who is called by Malaniuk the first, and this is a citation, political engineer of Russia, who wanted to make a space for Russian organic culture. But the problem was that he wanted to use totalitarian repressive methods to do that. and it failed. But he was a political technologist, right? So once again, using simple language to organize people, directly impacting them as an intellectual. That's what Malaniuk wants to do himself. So he defines Ukrainian national power in cultural resilience of this organic culture. It cannot be controlled. It has to be acknowledged. And the knowledge of this historical continuity of this fight is the way to find power. So once again, resilience of the organic culture and the remembering of the fight. These are two components. So Malaniuk says that Ukraine needs to be Romanized, but not by the Russia, but by its own elite. Right? So there must be this sword, right, that will create the order. He gives different examples of how he imagines this, but he also says that once, if you want to think about what Romanization is that it's something that is not organic at all, right? It's not values or literature, not culture. It's infrastructure. It's laws, architecture, and certain roots. That's it. Yeah. So that's what is missing. We have culture. We will always have it. That's why we can fight forever. But we need infrastructure. That is not culture. So then he shows that actually there is already some historical connection between Ukraine and Rome, despite it's very minor still. So we have Hellenic roots and we have Roman roots. So let's combine them in the dialectical culture. So what I'm showing here is that, yeah, organic, the stylus, the pen, and bureaucratic, the dagger, if you combine them together, that's the school. The school, that's what makes you a sovereign. And he uses Kiev-Mohyla Academy as an example. He says that Kiev-Mohyla Academy preceded Cossackization. Without culture, there would be no possibility to organize in a weaponized society, right? So once again, sovereign is someone who can embrace both the Dionysian part of culture, organic, but also the Apollonian bureaucratic, something that is harsh on us. So I'm really close to summarize. The goal of the elite of a sovereign state is to teach history, develop the language, and embrace political methods, which means opportunism in foreign affairs, whatever it is. And this is the philosophical context in which I see Malaniuk. I'll be quick here to tell you why I chose these names. And this is an invitation. If you want, we can talk during the Q&A session about any of these, but let me just introduce the items here. The first one is Antonko Davidovich, Behind the Curtain. This is the book that I'm really honored to teach in one of my classes. Antonko Davidovich was a doctor by profession, and he is mentioned by Malaniuk as one of the greatest inspirators for him of his biological understanding of human, right? And Antonko Davidovich actually uses the metaphor of the curtain, zavisa, as a psychological way to cope with trauma of collaboration when you try to repress these ideas, right? So you basically just close up. And the story develops as Russian wife humiliates Ukrainian mother in Uzbekistan. And so the doctor, who is an ardent Stalinist, he constantly just tries not to notice that. That's the theory of being traumatized as a colonized subject. Then Buber Newman, Under Two Dictatorship. This is a person, that's a female fighter who was sent into both labor camps. And once she went into the court against the Soviet government, they said that Kolyma, where she was stationed, it was not a camp because it didn't have walls. So this is a way to compare the discourses, right? And Malaniuk, of course, spoke the discourses himself. Then Havel, The Power of the Powerless, when he says that if people do not perform anticipatory obedience, the Soviet government would not be able to establish this power. So this is a comment on, situations when people say, oh, the Russian people don't have any power. Yes, technically they don't have any power, but also based on what Havel showed us and proved it in practice, once people stop obeying, there is no power. Then Havel and Michnik, the uncanny era, conversations between them, right, and how dissident cracked totalitarianism, and we can talk about the idea of dissidence as organic culture within a totalitarian culture, this kind of constant ferment that appears. Kundera, who I mentioned already, Czesław Miłosz, who is really close to Malaniuk not only in his ideas and in The Captive Mind. If you remember, he studies his friends, as he says, the friends who started killing my friends, and I want to know why. And he says, just because they were egoistic and they wanted to have power. So that's the reason. And this is really close to what Malaniuk wants to say about this captive mind, that people really look for the explanation to do what they wanted to do. So ideology comes after their organic feeling. And also, I wanted to introduce two texts that I wrote my dissertation on, because I think that they're really close in the discourse. So Sakharov, the inventor of the nuclear bomb, but also a dissident who wrote after the occupation of Czechoslovakia, Notes on Progress and the idea of a pluralist society, where he speaks specifically that a pluralist society is natural, exactly like Malaniuk says. So we should not try to build a mono society. If we build a mono society, it's already a Roman type of state, yeah. But organic society will always be out of this grasp. And the last one is Turchin, Valentin Turchin. This is the person who started as a founder of Refal, Russian language coding, in the 70s, but he was kicked out of the USSR for his activity for the Amnesty International. He worked together with Sakharov. And once he was expelled for his samizdat, The Inertia of Fear and the State Machine. It's a long work where he explains that actually this bureaucracy that exists, it just constantly intimidates, subjugates people to violence, and in this way it creates this kind of eternal state. So he comes to the same idea of the bureaucratic Roman state that kind of has to be eternal and control population. So here I stop with my presentation. I'll be very happy to take the questions and the moderators' questions too as well. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tatiana Dzedevich, and first of all, I would like to thank Towarzystwo Tarasa Shevchenko for hosting this event, and I am thankful to our audience who came here in this rainy day, and I'm thankful Serhii Tereshchenko, Dr. Tereshchenko, for inviting me, because it's really an enigma. I remember undergraduate student in the first year of his studies asking curious questions in Kiev Mohyla Academy, a blink of the eye, and he is a doctor inviting me to moderate his lecture on Yevhen Malaniuk. It's really a very touching moment, and I would like to open a session for questions and answers, but as I was listening to this lecture, I was curious, and I reserve right to ask first questions by myself. And first, I admire this broad spectrum of intercultural, cross-cultural references, but at the same time, I wonder if we really need Miloš Kundera to understand Yevhen Malaniuk and his role for Ukrainian culture right now. And is not it this what Vitaly Chernatsky named in one of his lectures and articles, epistemic injustice toward Ukrainian culture, that to talk about ourselves, we need some lens outside to prove our validity, to be listened and to be heard. Could not we develop our voice organically, as Malaniuk wrote about it, from our tradition, from our culture. Why do we need to apply those lenses outside? Would not be its most powerful and structured. Also, when I was listening to it, and actually when I was invited, I did my rereading of Malaniuk and realized that how much he implemented in his essayistic, what now we call post-colonial studies, and how close he was in articulating all those points. So probably when we are talking about decolonization, post-colonial place of Ukrainian culture, probably we should apply Malaniuk first and those Western names because we already had it and we already articulated it in our culture. And that is why I have my third question to our presenter. From your point of view and from your close reading of Malaniuk, do you think his writing is more close to Ukrainian audience now or in 90s, or reverse the question? We in post-totalitarian, post-Soviet Ukraine discovered Malaniuk for ourselves in 90s when he was present in diaspora much earlier. But my feeling that we did not read closely and we did not learn from Malaniuk in that time. So what is your view on this? So it's three questions from your former professor, and then we will ask audience for questions.
And thank you so much, Tanya, for your kind words and for these questions. I'll try to answer them, although I'm not sure that I think that there are three questions. I think there are maybe two, but let's try. So first, why do we need Miłosz? Why do we need Havel? Why do we need anyone else, right? First of all, because we need this comparison to see ourselves in the context. I really believe we should not acquire the phenomenologist perspective that we are unique, we deal with unique problems, because I just don't believe that Malaniuk would support that. He wanted a holistic, universalist theory of why people living here in the valley would behave differently to people living in the mountains. So this kind of comparison makes his views from artistic combination of different sources, as I showed you, the genealogy, right? Lots of influences, towards actually the pragmatic question that he tries to solve: how to deal with Russian occupation. And that's exactly what Miłosz, Havel, and they deal with the same problem. They deal with the problem: what do you do if your state disappeared under Russia? That's why I compare them, and I show that actually their answers are the same. Yeah, and their answers are the same because Malaniuk participates in the creation of scholarship. He speaks an academic language, and he wants to really to transmit this knowledge to his readers. And I think that we can compare him not only with the people from the 19th century, but of course we can compare him with the philosophers like Hegel or Herder that he mentions himself, not because he mentioned them, but because his project is to rewrite something that historically already exists. Yeah, he wants to be neo-romantic, to create new romanticism for Ukraine, to emphasize strong parts like Shevchenko and de-emphasize weak parts. But overall, once he creates this knowledge, this scholarship, at the same time, he always treats culture as a postmodernist. It's true. He thinks that culture is secondary, even meaningless. He says, yeah, Archipenko, the sculptor, he believes that art is religion. But I don't think that my readers should think this way to read my work. Yeah. So scholarship itself is a way to transcend artistic individuality and start speaking the language of millions, language of scientists. And I think that I'll add here for me that I think that we should not narrow our perspective on Ukrainian problems, because our experience for the last years, for the last decade, probably educated us that what we experience, people in Syria experience as well. The people in Afghanistan experience the same. The people in Vietnam experience the same. That the Cold War was exactly what we see today. Two states trying to discharge their weapons, but at the same time, one state really wants to destroy sovereignty, right? So we should not overlook the mechanics. We should not make them into ethics. So once we zoom out, I guess, we just are able to engage in a different language, a more objective language, that the same things happen to very different people. So that's a way to emancipate them as well. And I should remind you that Shevchenko already started doing that with the Caucasus. And another point here to help me with this, as I said, that Malaniuk sees this emancipatory project in Ukrainian culture as well as in European culture. So for him, Ukrainian culture is part of European culture, part of these names that I discussed with you, because they all care about emancipating people. It's not only about fighting with Russia, but also making people free from everything, from capitalism as well. They're critical of that. So they are really trying to manage people by letting a lot of things go. And the last thing, actually the third question about the audience, yeah, and the audience that should have appeared in the 90s when the Soviet Union fell and Malaniuk was republished in Ukraine, because before that he was published only outside. And it still remained an elitist culture. We discussed that together, right? So that it did not become the mainstream. But I heard all of the ideas that I told you today from my professor, Volodymyr Morinets at Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, who gave pretty spectacular lectures on various poets. But I remember just citations from Malaniuk's poetry, from his ideas. And I was very surprised once I took Malaniuk for my project and looked really deep into him, that I myself overlooked this discourse, but this discourse today is one of the most progressive you can find in social media. So I was really surprised that it took me 3 years to come to the point where I already was. So maybe it's a small comment on what Malaniuk himself said, that culture without politics is powerless. We just now are in the moment of history where we act upon our culture. We know what Malaniuk wanted to say, and we also want to hear him out. I think so. Thank you.
Thank you. I could have follow-up questions, but probably the audience have some questions.
I have a follow-up question. So you mentioned that during the talk and just right now that according to Malaniuk, the culture is powerless. But if we just like drop for a second his nonfiction and think about his fiction, this is culture that is pretty powerful. Like he is an example of culture being powerful now. Like just could you please clarify what he means by that?
Thank you. So I guess the simplest answer for me to this question is that he is a dialectical thinker. That he really embraces the paradox, and instead of saying that this is right, this is wrong, he says we will live in a paradox, and the paradox is such that without power, culture will not help us, but without culture, we cannot have power. We just need it, but without power, it's nothing. So we need two components. So we need bureaucracy. Yeah.
Please, I would like to ask the questions on Ukrainian education in Kiev. Oh, okay, let's speak about Kiev, about Russian-speaking Kiev. In the Soviet time, yes, in the Soviet time, I myself is from Russian-speaking family, and I studied in Ukrainian school, and all of us were like me. And after when we finished the school, all of us we were bilingual, not just Ukrainian speaking. Yes, I speak about that time, but all of us always defended Ukrainian culture, pro-Ukrainian project, and. What is it, Ukrainian education in this case? Is it Dionysial, or is it Roman, or does it come from the nature? Russians tell that it was a violence to make Russian-speaking children to study in Ukrainian, but it was not violence. We willingly studied and mastered our Ukrainian. What it was.
Thank you so much. So he uses the word school in the same meaning as Michel Foucault. That's any institution to which you come to be either educated or brainwashed. And that's exactly what Ukrainian nation needs, the school in quotation marks, which both means cultural production, art that enchants people, and also science, the knowledge of oneself. How he wants to bluntly say that without having Ukrainian science and Ukrainian art being taught to people, you cannot have a state. There is no organic culture that, it's not enough. Yeah.
Виясніть оце римське явище, про яке Маланюк говорив.
Thank you. So once again, he is a dialectician who says that two cultures create a state. That state cannot exist only in organic state. And so he says that an example of Hellenic democracy is Ukraine, because Ukrainians are individualistic. They take decisions in a gathering, veche, right? And he takes the discourse straight from Kostomarov. He speaks the same languages, he gives the same examples, but then he says that Russia is different. It's hollow, it's bureaucratic, exactly what Kostomarov says. But plot twist here is that it's not we have to deny it, we have to reject it as the other, but we actually have to become, we have to learn this part and have this as well. And this part, Roman part, means that we have our school, that we can organize organic culture through the state. By the way, it's really important for him as a romantic thinker, neo-romantic thinker, to visualize individual sovereignty as having citizenship in a sovereign state. Political sovereignty comes with the Roman style of reign. So, I know, I can give you probably an example that it's not enough to just experience organic culture. You have to be trained properly by the elites to exist in a society. Art always is social.
In other words, he claims that Ukraine needs state, and this state, like Rome had state and had infrastructure, and embedded state ideas through developing school and other institutions. That problem of Ukrainians, that they are not capable of creating institutions. They are too anarchic, too free spirit. And this Hellenic Ellada, Stepova Ellada, what he wrote, it's a power, but also at the same time, it's a weakness because we are so good to bring together at the critical moment, but we don't have institutions. And he claimed in that time what we claim now, that, okay, we learn how to unite on Maidans, we are great making Maidans. We cannot think without it, but we need to learn how to do the next step and to build in institutions, all kind of institutions which will bring us together. And that was the strong moment of Rome Empire versus Hellenic Empire. And that was Malaniuk's ideas, and he repeated them many times. Any questions?
My question is about the point that Tatiana Stevich made about Malaniuk being an elitist writer and elitist culture that's being reread right now in Ukraine. So I wonder if how his work was reviewed in the time that he published them. So in the other side of Iron Curtain, so Europe and United States, maybe Canada, and how did he have people who followed him, and how the intellectuals back then think about his ideas?
Thank you so much. The idea of the elitist culture is connected to the idea that class is important, that social stratification is the way to organize better, and that actually total horizontality is as bad as rigid verticality. But besides this, the idea that elitist culture will impact us, it's more of a perception question. We need elitist culture to make it mainstream later on. We don't conserve it like Panteleimon Kulish wanted. So there is a stage between elitist becomes kitsch. Yeah, and elitist is the moment when a poet is able to grasp something that enchants people. So he also mentions one important thing, that whatever the elitist culture is, once the organic culture changes, there needs to be a new Roman state. So Roman state is not something stable. And there is no even definition what is organic and non-organic. So if Ukraine becomes a totalitarian state where the Roman type of power rules, right, even sovereign Ukraine, then it's not gonna. It will be contested by a new organic culture that appears. So Rome took over Greece, an organic culture, being bureaucratic, but it was taken over by the Goth, he says. Right? So the position of who is organic and who is now Roman changed. And the Holy Roman Empire is kind of this continuation of the idea. Yeah, okay, the Germans are now the Roman Empire, while the Roman Empire in the past is the organic source for them, right? So it's constant change. And when we talk about, once again, elitist culture, there's something that goes to peak and then it goes to the masses constantly. Yeah. Was it the, yes, so please, can you?
Reception.
Oh, yes, yes, thank you so much, yes. So the second part of it is that he was positively received by the New York poetry group, Bogdan Rubchak, Maxim Tarnavsky, and others. And I already said that there was these kind of points of contact with his art because he really believed that art can enchant, right? That you can create art that will formally be beautiful and it doesn't have to have any important meaning for us, right? That's what they liked. But overall, it's really hard to say about his reception, since he got self-isolated in the Ukrainian language. Although he lived here for 2 decades, he never learned English, and he professionally worked as an engineer, but not of high ranks. While he had his career as a Ukrainian intellectual, the reality, was different. That it was just a person who had a side hobby, but he was really good at it. And today we definitely recognize him as a scholar equal to us, because it is a scholarly writing.
Probably we should contextualize him also in Polish culture in between war period, because he was close to Skamandrita group. He was together with many poets of that time, and they translated his poetry in Polish and published it in Polish language in Warsaw. So we can talk a lot about Ukrainian-Polish relationships during Second Polish Republic, but at the same time, he organically became a part and united several groups, Ukrainian immigration in Poland at the time, and cultural groups, and he was own in those circles. And also we should not forget Prague circle, and it was again not only Ukrainian closed community, but he married a Czech woman, so it means that he was not close in his community. So what I wanted to summarize, that we need not only reread Malaniuk, but probably publicized him outside of our community, and to show how much he articulated in those times, and that Ukrainian culture was already in those positions, which are very powerful right now. And it's really a very difficult moment for us as a Ukrainian community, but at the same time, probably this is the right moment to establish Ukrainian culture in the global scale and show what we had and what we have, and that it's our future in this global community. So in this moment, maybe it's time to close this session. Thank you so much.
I would like to say that thank you for both our guests for lecture and discussion and comments, and thank you audience for coming to us. Thank you.